All right, buckle up, because today we are diving headfirst into a child custody case that took a serious turn.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about Stacy Lynn Jones,
Okay.
who you might also know as Stacy Lynn Dimarco.
Mm-hmm.
You've provided us with the legal briefs from both sides, Ms. Jones's attorney in the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
So it's like we have front row seats to this whole legal battle.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating one.
Yeah?
This case throws a serious curveball when it comes to the boundaries of custody orders
Mhm.
and what happens when a parent feels like they have to take matters into their own hands.
Right. Okay, so
No.
to really grasp the weight of this case,
Okay.
let's rewind to the beginning.
Okay.
Mrs. Jones and Mr. Dimarco share a 12-year-old son, J.D.,
Mm-hmm.
and their custody arrangement was very clear about when and where each parent had him.
Absolutely. The order specifically outlined weekend visits with Mrs. Jones.
Okay,
And it even went as far as dictating the exact times for pickup and drop-off.
got it. So everything's by the book.
Yeah.
Now imagine it's Friday, August 26, 2022,
Okay.
and Mrs. Jones goes to pick up J.D. for the weekend,
Okay.
but there's just something off.
Okay.
Miss Jones later testified that she saw Mr. Dimarco outside barefoot unloading a cooler.
Interesting.
Seems insignificant,
Yeah.
right? But in that moment, it struck her as strange, almost like a red flag,
Right.
especially considering JD was already dealing with anxiety stemming from some past trauma.
And this anxiety often reared its head during those transitions between parents.
Right.
JD would typically rock back and forth in the car.
Oh.
So you can see how Miss Jones might be extra attuned to any sign of distress from him.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Fast forward to Saturday.
Okay.
JD's visibly agitated pacing, which Mrs. Jones said was completely out of character for him.
Wow.
Naturally, this leads to some intense conversations between them.
Mm-hmm.
The briefs don't reveal exactly what was said,
Right.
but whatever it was, it really shook Miss Jones up.
Okay.
To the point that when Sunday rolls around, she doesn't return JD to his father as scheduled. Instead, she calls the police that evening to report her concerns for her son's well-being.
And that's where things really heat up.
Yeah.
Monday, August 29th becomes a whirlwind of activity.
Oh, boy.
Think about it. Mr. Dimarco, determined to get his son back, works with the Oilton Police Department and obtains not one, but two legal orders, a writ of habeas corpus and a writ of assistance.
Wow.
These aren't just pieces of paper. They essentially give the police the authority to search for JD and bring him back to his father. The situation just got very real very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, so the pressure's mounting.
Mhm.
The police, led by Chief Brown, search Mrs. Jones's house, but no JD.
Okay.
She tells them he's with his grandfather, but as the search widens, Chief Brown even considers issuing an Amber Alert.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about high stakes.
Absolutely. And eventually, Mrs. Jones contacts Chief Brown to tell him she and JD are at a hotel in Cushing.
Okay.
The police meet them there.
Okay.
JD is returned to Mr. Dimarco, and Miss Jones is arrested.
Arrested for both violating the custody order and obstructing an officer.
Yes.
She's eventually convicted on both charges, but her attorney cries foul and files an appeal.
Okay.
And this appeal, my friend, is where it gets juicy.
Juicy is right.
Yeah.
Remember those legal briefs you gave us?
Yes.
They lay out three major points of contention.
Okay.
First up, insufficient evidence.
Okay.
Miss Jones's attorney argues that she had good reason to believe JD was in danger and that she did notify the authorities, meaning she should be off the hook according to Oklahoma law. That's the crux of it. Oklahoma law actually has a built-in defense for these kinds of custody violations.
Okay.
If a parent genuinely believes their child is in danger and they reach out to the appropriate authorities,
Right.
they might have a case.
Okay.
But the state wasn't buying it.
So what's their counter-argument? Why do they believe there was enough evidence to convict?
The state argues that Mrs. Jones didn't immediately report her concerns to the Department of Human Services, which, according to them, is the appropriate authority in this situation.
Okay.
They also didn't believe that her actions were justified, implying that they didn't see enough evidence to suggest JD was in actual danger.
So it becomes a battle of perspectives. Did the jury believe Mrs. Jones acted out of genuine fear for her son, or did they side with the state's view that she overstepped her bounds finistally? It's a nail-biter.
It really is. And what's frustrating is that there's potentially a missing piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Body camera footage.
Uh-huh.
Apparently it exists, but for whatever reason, it was never brought into the picture.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe it holds clues that could have tipped the scales one way or another.
Right.
Like we'll get to that later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Mrs. Jones's second point of attack.
Okay.
Double jeopardy.
Okay.
Here's where it gets really interesting, legally speaking at least.
Yeah.
Her attorney argues that charging Mrs. Jones with two separate crimes, violating the custody order and obstructing an officer, is essentially punishing her twice for the same act. They're saying that both charges stem from the same initial action, keeping JD from his father.
Yeah.
But don't those sound like two different things? Violating a custody order is one thing, but obstructing an officer seems like it could have happened independently, right?
That's what the state argued. But Mrs. Jones' attorney pointed to a specific Oklahoma statute,
Okay.
Title 21, Section 11,
Okay.
which prohibits multiple punishments for a continuing offense.
Okay.
This basically means a series of acts driven by a single impulse.
Okay, got it.
So they argued that even though Mrs. Jones's actions played out over a couple of days, they were all rooted in that initial driving force protecting her son.
And the state's response, did they buy that single impulse argument?
Not one bit.
Okay.
The state fired back, arguing that violating the custody order was a completely separate offense from allegedly obstructing Chief Brown's investigation.
Right.
They said that proving obstruction requires demonstrating additional elements beyond simply violating the custody order, making it a distinct crime in their eyes.
Okay, so both sides present strong arguments. It's a legal tug of war. What did the appeal court have to say about this double jeopardy claim? Did they side with Mrs. Jones?
You might be surprised the appeal court actually agreed with Mrs. Jones.
Wow.
At least partially.
Okay.
Remember how the original trial upheld both of her convictions?
Yes.
Well, the appeals court decided that charging her with two separate crimes for essentially the same act was overkill.
Right.
They threw out one of those convictions, which is a big win for her side.
Wow, talk about a plot twist.
Yeah.
So while Mrs. Jones didn't completely escape a conviction, this double jeopardy issue is a huge win for her, and this could be a game changer for how custody cases are prosecuted in Oklahoma, potentially making it harder to slap parents with multiple charges for a single incident.
That's exactly right. It's definitely something to keep an eye on because this decision could have ripple effects on future cases. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have that third point of contention to unpack.
Okay.
Remember the missing body camera footage?
Oh, how could I forget? It's like that nagging feeling that something crucial is missing from the story.
Yeah.
Mrs. Jones's attorney claims that the Oilton Police Department's failure to produce this footage was a major misstep, potentially denying her a fair trial.
Right.
Their argument hinges on the fact that this footage could have been a game changer.
Exactly.
Okay.
It could have either corroborated Mrs. Jones's version of events, showing JD's distress and her attempts to communicate with Chief Brown.
Right.
Or it could have contradicted her testimony, potentially revealing something that would have damaged her case.
Right.
We simply don't know because we haven't seen it.
So what's the state's excuse for not producing this potentially crucial evidence?
They kept it straightforward. Mrs. Jones's attorney never formally requested the body camera footage during the trial.
Okay.
And legally speaking, if the defense doesn't request it, the prosecution isn't obligated to just hand it over.
That's a tough one from a legal perspective. I get it, but from a human perspective, it feels like a missed opportunity to get a clearer picture of what actually went down.
Yeah.
It almost makes this case feel like an unsolved mystery. Like, what would have happened if that footage had been on the table? Would the jury have felt differently? It makes you wonder.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you think about all those crime dramas where a missing piece of evidence suddenly comes to light and changes the entire trajectory of the case.
Exactly. And it begs the question, what does this all mean for our listener? What can we learn from this tangled web of custody disputes and legal battles?
This case really throws into sharp relief the fact that even when there's a system in place,
Right.
things can get incredibly complex if you're a parent. Especially one navigating the choppy waters of child custody. This is a stark reminder of how crucial it is to be well-versed in the court's orders
Yeah.
and to communicate with the authorities in a timely and clear manner, especially if you believe your child's safety is on the line.
It's a good reminder for all of us, even if we're not in the midst of a custody battle, that, these situations can be incredibly nuanced.
And emotionally charged, for
Yeah.
sure. We've been focusing on the legal back and forth.
Right.
But at the heart of it all is a child caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And two parents under an immense amount of stress.
Absolutely. Custody battles can really bring out the best and worst in people.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get lost in the weeds of the legal process.
Totally.
But it's crucial to remember that the child's well-being should be the North Star guiding all decisions.
Couldn't agree more. This case also underscores that the justice system, while designed to be fair and impartial, isn't infallible.
Right.
There will always be limitations, gray areas, and the potential for things to fall through the cracks.
It's like that saying, the wheels of justice grind slowly.
Yeah.
But sometimes even when the grinding stops, you're still left with unanswered questions.
Very true. And this case is a prime example.
Yeah.
That missing body camera footage continues to loom over everything.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, what if it had been presented as evidence?
Right. What if the footage had captured something completely unexpected? What if it showed something that completely contradicted the narratives presented during the trial?
Imagine this. The footage shows Mr. Dimarco clearly intoxicated,
Wow.
maybe even brandishing a firearm while picking up JD.
Oh my gosh.
Would that have changed the outcome for Mrs. Jones?
Right.
Would the court still have focused on her violation of the custody order? Or would they have considered her actions justified, given the potential threat to her son?
That's a heavy hypothetical, and it really gets to the heart of the debate surrounding parental rights versus the court's interpretation of the law. It makes you think, where do you draw the line? When does a parent's right to protect their child supersede a court order, especially when there's a perceived threat?
It's a difficult question with no easy answers.
Yeah.
And this case highlights just how complex these situations can be.
Right.
What's considered sufficient evidence in one context might not hold up in another. And the presence or absence of something like body camera footage can completely change the game.
It's a reminder that while we strive for clarity and justice within the legal system, there's always an element of human perception, interpretation, and even chance that comes into play.
Well said. This deep dive into the case of Stacy Lynn Jones has been a winding road, full of twists and turns, and ultimately leaving us with more questions than answers.
It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey through the world of custody battles, legal loopholes, and the ever-present question of what truly serves the best interests of a child. We hope this deep dive has given you food for thought and maybe even inspired you to look a little deeper into the cases that grab your attention.
Absolutely, because sometimes the most important insights are hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone to take the time to really listen, analyze, and most importantly, to keep asking questions.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those perspectives open.